Hi, my friend. Welcome to the 1 Minute to Glory podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Alvarez. I love to tune in with you every week. This episode, I hope that you feel refreshed, or that it sparks curiosity, or perhaps even gives you a different outlook on life. But at least, I hope that you get something out of it. I thoroughly enjoyed interviewing Kristina Driscoll, an energetic woman with a remarkable journey. Formerly a financial advisor, she transitioned to roles of wife, mother, and caregiver to her husband. After her husband passed away and her son left for college, she ventured into entrepreneurship, launching the She's Brave podcast, available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Through her platform, she guides women on the journey to bravery and resilience. As the owner and CEO of the She's Brave podcast, she has propelled it to the top 2% of all podcasts worldwide in less than 6 months. You're certain to appreciate her as much as I did, thanks to her vibrant and generous nature. Give it a listen. Hi, Kristina. It's such a pleasure to have you today. I wanted to share a little bit how I know you. We are in a private Facebook group around the podcasting world and how to create a podcast, how to launch it. And I was drawn to your generosity. Your post stood out to me where you offered yourself to be interviewed. This is what you've done. There's humility. This is my success. Top 2% of all podcasts globally, which is amazing in less than a year, a few months, I think. So we'll talk about that definitely, but I was definitely drawn to you. I was thinking there's a story behind this woman. So I went to your podcast. It's called She's Brave Podcast. And that's how you describe it. You say that you interview women from around the world who have overcome obstacles and find out how, as you say, they became brave, resilient, and authentic. And just knowing the little bit that I know about you, it seems like these attributes pretty much describe you as well, more than anything. And so I want to know, can you share a little bit about your story and how you came to the world of podcasting?
Sure, yeah. I'll give you the super Cliff Notes version because I don't think everyone needs to hear my whole life story in detail. But I think for various reasons, sometimes when life is hard is when we finally spiritually grow. So in my 20s, I had some hard things happen and I went to counseling and I just really delved into that whole self-development journey. This was actually back in the 90s. I'm 55 and that's another thing I'm proud about is being able to be successful at any age. So, and I will talk more about that. I really worked on myself in my 20s. And when I was 30, I went on a group hike led by Bill Driscoll, who became my husband. I got out of the car, our eyes locked, and it was a group hike through a group called the Mountaineers here in the Seattle area. And we were hiking on Mount Rainier. And darn it, the path is so narrow. It's so narrow. It's single file. But I was determined to talk to this man because there was just something like a magnetic pull when our eyes locked. And I had never really had that. So I elbowed my way to the front of the trail so that I could chat with him for a while. And long story short, we were married 6 months later. He had never been married. He'd never had kids. We both were financial advisors, worked in the finance world. And, here's the really interesting part of it, unconventional part of it. He was 24 years older than me. And yet, I think that we both just knew that we were meant to go on this journey together. And no one was ever like, hey, wait a minute, she's a lot younger than you, or he's a lot older than you. I think when you're really on your right path, when you're authentic and true to yourself, people sense it and they don't challenge you on your decisions. So things were good. We had some infertility issues, but 4 years later had our son. Then when our son was 5, my husband was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, and it was a 12-year journey. I chose to be a stay-at-home mom because it had taken so long to have our child. And then when my husband was diagnosed, I was like, okay, I'm just going to manage our investments. And in society's eyes, Alexandra, I wasn't anybody. I was really a nobody. I was just a caregiver to my husband and my son. And yet that felt right for me. That felt like
Mhm.
it was the right decision to
Mhm.
be that and do that in life. And that's one of my big messages to all your listeners out there. No matter what you're doing, even in society's eyes, if it's not important in society's eyes, but it's important to
Mhm.
you, be authentic to yourself. And if you
Mhm.
aren't being authentic to yourself, start working on that real quick. Because what I've learned is that if you're not living your life authentically, you will never be happy. That is actually one of the regrets of the dying. I wish I would have cared less about what other people thought about me. I wish I would have lived life according to my own standards and my own experiences and not worried about what other people thought. And I always like to say, I make decisions based on what's best for me. I don't worry about what the Joneses next door think. What are the Joneses going to think? What are the Joneses going to think when I start my podcast? Well,
Mhm.
I don't really care what the Joneses think when I start my I want to start a podcast. I think some of it has to do with social media because we all love our social media, and social media feeds us. It tells us what the equation is for happiness, right? So the equation for happiness
Mhm.
is, $1 million in the bank, big house, big car, perfect family, blah, blah, blah. But that's not happiness for all of us. I'm not saying that it can't make you happy, but
Mhm.
it may not. And so basically, as far as the podcasting journey, eventually my husband passed away. My son graduated from high school. I remarried that summer and we went on our honeymoon to Peru, got really bad case of COVID. And there's a long story as to why we got a really bad strain, but we won't get into that other than to say I had to come home and rest for a month. And I believe that sometimes when we get sick, it's God way of saying, I need you to slow down and listen to me. Because
Mhm.
Alexandra, have you ever I'm sure you did. I get this feeling. When I feel unsettled, I feel deeply unsettled and I don't know
Mhm.
why. And it's driving me bananas. Well, the reason why you're feeling unsettled is because you're meant for more. And
Mhm.
God is just trying to give you that little
This
nudge.
is
Discontent.
something.
Yep. When you're feeling discontented, it's because you are actually meant for more and you need to
Mhm.
put yourself out there in some way, shape, or form. And if you're stuck, which is usually what is where you are, you're stuck, but I don't even know where to start. You literally take one action. That's something I've started doing every day. I ask myself this question: what's one brave action I can take today? And it might
Right.
be tiny. I mean, it just might be a little teeny tiny step. It might be
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm going to go to Chamber of Commerce meeting and I am going to like just walk up to somebody I don't know and introduce myself. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert. So when I get in a large group of people, sometimes I just want to sit back and not talk to anybody. And
Mhm.
so, it could be just as simple as
That
that.
would
But
be me too,
yep,
definitely.
yep,
Just
yeah,
piggyback a little bit on what you were saying. A few things that stood out to me is that you've been on a journey of self-discovery since your 20s. You mentioned about being authentic, and that goes with knowing yourself. It is a long journey of understanding the deepest part of ourselves. It does require for us to slow down. Otherwise, something is going to make us slow down because we can't. Otherwise, we're just like a train going haybuck and going nowhere, really. But then you mentioned something that was really interesting to me as well is where you met your husband. It was a narrow path.
yes,
And I do believe that sometimes the what is the most authentic or what is really the path for each one of us is not the broad road from the social media that we hear or the lies that we tell ourselves even. It's that narrow path that is not the easiest necessarily. It may be actually the scariest because it may not be a very much paved road, but it's that one that will lead you to your destination. And yeah, so it does require, I think that's why the narrow road is not always the one, since it's not the most common one. It does require courage, it does require grit and resilience and all these attributes that you mentioned a lot and all the women that you interview on your podcast. How does one become more authentic or live a more authentic life? Like, how do you
okay.
do that?
Okay, before I answer that question,
Yes.
I just want to go back to something that you said because
Yeah.
I've been interviewed over 40 times and I have never had someone say to me, talk about the narrow path on Mount Rainier, where I elbowed my way to the front to my husband. And then the analogy of that narrow path being the best path. Like that's the path you want to be on. And it is
Right.
usually it can often be the hardest path. And it's the path that most people don't choose. And I'm just 100%
Right.
with you on that,
Mhm. Yeah.
And you're asking me, how did I develop like the authenticity and the grit and the strength? I mean, number one, I do, this is cliche, but I'm going to mention it again. When you see a book, you hear about a book maybe 2 or 3 times. I think it's time for you to read that book. I spend quiet time every morning doing, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes of reading. I also meditate for about 5 to 10 minutes and I write for 5 to 10 minutes. And I think being on some kind of spiritual journey, whatever that looks like to you, you don't even have to be religious to do that. You and I think we mentioned we are both consider ourselves Christians, but you can still be on a spiritual journey. Um, I think that all my life experiences, all that self development got me into a place of living more in the now. That's something I talk about a lot because when my husband was diagnosed, I was terrified and I was living too much in the future. If you live too much in the future, you
Mhm.
get anxiety. So I was having a lot of anxiety. If you live
Mhm.
too much in the past, you're depressed. And so the best place to live is in the now. And I really had to work on that a lot throughout my husband's journey. I also pray for signs. I do. I mean, we don't have time to get into that today, but I will literally pray to God for a sign of whether I'm doing, if there's something unconventional. It's just something that's developed a tiny bit. It's developed slowly over time. And so the authenticity part of it, I think, was really developed throughout my husband's journey of Alzheimer's, choosing to be a caregiver because that's what felt right. And learning that about myself, that when I make decisions that are best for me and my family, regardless of what other people think, then I'm happiest. One day we lived in a regular sized house, but there were some mansions near where we live. And one day when my son was 10 and my husband was in the care home, my son said, "Why don't we live in a mansion, Mom?" And I said, "If I go back to work full time as a financial advisor, we can live in a mansion too, but you will not see me hardly at all because
Mhm.
that industry you work really long hours. There's a lot of evening events, there's a lot of socialization and networking. And so I said, you would not see much of me." And so
Mhm.
he thought about it for maybe 5 seconds and he said, "I think I'm good with our house the way it is now, like,
Yes. The
so
wealth
it's
is each other. Right.
and again, having a mansion's great. Life is all about these decisions. What's the most important thing to me?
Yes.
Do I want to work hard and live in the mansion, or do I want more time, or do I want more money? And not that those things are necessarily mutually exclusive either. Sometimes
Right.
we can have them both. And that's something I think we should always be working towards as well. But so the authenticity part, I think, came from being a mama bear and just trying to always make the best decisions for me and my son, even if people didn't
Mhm.
agree.
Mhm.
So you have that. And then I think the grit and the resilience that came when I started podcasting, when I started taking courses on podcasting. And the very first course that I took, I was terrified. I just sat in the Zoom room and I never said boo until one day somebody said, "Does somebody want to practice interviewing with me?" And I just had the courage to raise my hand and say, "I will." I was terrified. We both jumped on Zoom. But then it was super fun. It was just kind of silly and ridiculous. And we played back and forth and pretended to interview each other. And then we said, let's hit record. Ha ha ha. This is so funny. And so we did that. And then I got the courage to reach out to a bunch of other people and say, hey, who wants to practice with me? And then we'd fool around and I'd say, let's hit record. And some of those actually became interviews that were published. So that's like really, really fun. And so I think I always like to say I'm not a naturally gritty people. I believe there are naturally gritty people out there. I just had a woman on my podcast who's raised over $1 billion for charity as an auctioneer, originally with Chris Christie. Yeah. I think she was born with grit. Okay. I do. Like when she was 18, she was calling Christie's for 2 days for every day for 2 weeks before getting the internship there. Right. I'm like, hey, I was not born that way, but I'm 55 now and I believe it can be developed. And I have actually seen that in the last year and a half since I made that decision to try something. So I was feeling unsettled. I said, I don't know what I want to do. Okay. Oh, look, here's a podcasting class. Here, I'm just going to sign up for this thing here. I'm probably not going to podcast, but I'm just going to do it anyway. So that's my advice. Put your finger into something when you're feeling unsettled.
That you don't know.
That you don't know. And it'll either become that thing or it'll lead to something else.
Yeah.
I find that it encourages a muscle. So basically, every time you do that, like every time you take a big leap of faith and just take a tiny step, like me just reaching out to one person and saying, hey, I want to practice interviewing with you. Like now it's me asking somebody else. That first time was like really scary, but then after that, it got easier and easier and easier to just. So
then you're going to try something else that's harder.
So courage is a muscle, right? Like it's just, it slowly gets developed over time.
And then you're like the memory of it, oh, I've done this before and this is challenging, but I've done this before. So I know I can figure it out.
Yeah. And here's another really key component. I used to believe that if you tried something and you were scared, you felt fear, you were afraid, that meant, oh, then I'm not meant to do this because I have fear. I remember the day I signed up for my first podcasting class, the next 2 mornings, I woke up with a pit of my stomach and I was like, oh my gosh, maybe this is too much for me. But what I've learned since then is that everybody feels fear from time to time who's successful. Everybody, it's inevitable.
I mean, so it could be a good sign that you're actually putting yourself out there. It's a good sign that you're growing, at least.
Totally. In fact, Andy Grammer, if you don't know him, Google him. He's so inspirational. I saw him in concert about a year ago. He said that very thing. He said, you know what? If you don't wake up in the morning with a little bit of an edge, like, I'm building a business or I'm extending myself, so I'm feeling a little edgy. He said, then it's time for you to get a new job or it's time for you to make a life change. And I'm like, oh, really? So he's telling me it's actually good for me to feel a little bit edgy.
Then you build a relationship with fear. That's a little different. I heard that from someone who mentioned that she talks to fear as a person and she puts fear in the driver's seat. We're going to go together, but I'm in charge.
I love that.
Me too. So that's exciting to know that fear can evolve also, or your relationship to fear, so that you can, with more ease in a way, continue on your journey. Because sometimes the limiting beliefs around fear becomes paralyzing and then you're unable to do anything. But it's kind of a good balance there. And you mentioned also somewhere in your podcast, I don't know if it's on your podcast, on your website, you said, forget confidence, bravery is where it's at. What did you mean by that? I mean, it's kind of similar to what you're saying as far as courage, to move forward despite fears, despite setbacks. Confidence has nothing to do with it. Or maybe you build confidence over time.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Forget confidence. Courage is where it is. I think for a lot of my life, I didn't have a lot of confidence. I have more confidence now than I've ever had in my entire life. And, it really started to develop when I started this podcasting journey. And so I think what a lot of us say is, I'm not a confident person, therefore I can't be brave. And that's why I use that slogan a lot in a lot of my stuff, not everything, but a lot of times you see that pop up. I'm not asking you to be confident. I'm asking you to just take a tiny brave step. And you can be completely terrified when you're taking that step. And sometimes too, I'll say, "Hello, fear." She's like a little girl, like looking up at me. And I take her hand.
You
Her
can give
name's
her a name
Fear.
too.
Yep, her name's Fear. And I take her
Fear.
hand and I say, "You are more than welcome to come along with me." And that takes her power away too. Because I'm
Mm.
like, I don't care if you come with me. You can come with me, not come with me. Either way, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do it. And it might be tiny. And it's interesting with these little tiny stretches that we make. Then all of a sudden, we're like, if I can do that, then maybe I could take it even one step further.
Right, exactly. It keeps on building up. You did mention at the beginning that going through hardship builds your stamina or your understanding of things, or leads you to gaining more understanding of yourself and a kind of a life research. And then you mention again about the notion of time, the time that you had with your first husband, the present, the past, the future, but the present is really the only thing you had, right? Especially with your husband and his memory loss, at times, all you have is now, and it takes the pressure of what is tomorrow and what is past, but today. So do you think that you learning all of them? Sure, I mean, I don't know all the things that you've learned, and I'm sure the lessons were plenty about yourself, about caring, about all your fears, and you being 55, you've mentioned that a few times. Life is moving, I mean, time is just going, and so the present is what you have, and how to make the best of the present. Do you think that all these life lessons and you being where you're at now just make you see time and using it? Because we all have 24 hours in a day. We all have, whether we're 20 years old, 50 years old, whether we live here or in Pakistan or in Europe, but it's what we do with the time and how we view time as well. Did you have anything to share about that in particular? Life lessons?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, number one, having a husband who, yes, he was a lot older than me, but thought we would have a lot more years together. Because really, after maybe 5 years with the disease, he didn't know me or recognize me. I didn't have nearly as much time as I thought I would with him.
Mhm.
And that taught me don't take time for granted, because I think especially everyone does when you're young, you think you have forever. So you just
Right.
keep putting off all those
Wasting.
dreams, and
Mhm.
you don't necessarily have forever. That's one thing. Another thing was that was such a blessing to me was right at the beginning of his diagnosis, Oprah was doing an online book club live session. So, she used to have this book club. She might still. And the book was A New Earth, something like Arriving to Your Life Purpose or Coming into Your Life's
Mhm.
Purpose with Eckhart Tolle. And my brother had given me an Eckhart Tolle book and I didn't understand it. And this is part of why I like to tell the story, because most of us don't understand him. It's tough to understand him. But Oprah took this second book, A New Earth, and said, okay, we're going to actually jump on once a week live with Eckhart. Me, her, and Eckhart would, it was like kind of cutting edge, like 20 years ago, or well, no, 15 years ago. It was like cutting edge. You could click a link in your email and then you were live, and you'd
Mhm.
read you just one chapter a week, read the chapter. And then if you had any questions, you write them down. And then her and Eckhart would talk, and then you could submit your question and they would answer the questions. And so I did that over 10 weeks. And at the end of the 10 weeks, I finally understood the power of now. And I understood better of how to start working on living in the now. So I think that really helped me so much. And
Mhm.
I like to squeeze that in.
Talking about Oprah, I was listening to her once. I was just driving and said, let me just listen to Oprah. I hadn't before really listened to her talking, and something stood out. She mentioned about time. She mentioned about the importance of living in the present. And then she said this, it resonated. She said, because in the present, that is where God is.
Oh, I love
He's not,
that. I don't think I've heard that.
future's not here yet. God is outside time, but this is where we can see God in
Yeah.
our in our time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we miss out. We miss
Mm-hmm.
out on God or whatever is truly God speaking to us or us
Yeah.
responding to.
Yeah, for
What is God
sure.
teaching me here? Where is He? He is here now. And so that's enormous. I had never heard it say this way, but that was something that was
I
memorable from
love
all this.
that. Yeah. And then the other thing I think is that as women, the message I like to get out is a lot of your listeners, maybe you've got listeners out there who are stay-at-home moms. And
Mhm.
hey, I was a stay-at-home mom too. And
So was
look at me
I.
now. So, just do what's true to you in the time. And it's never ever, ever, ever too late. I think with women, when we hit our 40s or 50s, depending on the person, our kids, if we have kids, they grow
Mhm.
up, and that's where all of a sudden that maybe was our purpose. And maybe that was, in my case, I believe that was my purpose. My purpose was to invest everything into my husband and son at that time. And then when that was over,
Yeah,
I was like, there's a whole nother chapter ahead for me.
yeah,
And I can feel it. Like it's something big.
yeah,
And I think that as women, this is very common and it's okay. Like
yeah.
you can totally reinvent yourself. And if you are that stay at home mom who's saying, oh my gosh, I still have 5 more years before my kids are off to college or whatever, there's still something you can do. You can still take what's one brave thing I could do today towards that dream business I want to start up when the kids leave the nest? And
That would be me. I have a 13-year-old. So
there
I
you
have a
go.
9-year-old and
But
a
but you're
13-year-old.
actually and yet you're actually doing it now. And see all those little brave steps might actually get that little entrepreneurship thing going while they're still at home. And why not?
Yes, because the truth is we are not just what we do, we are. And there's so much that I want to express that they may not be ready to hear, but yet now is the time for me to express these things. And while I'm growing doing it, I can also impart more wisdom while they're here with me. Because I
Absolutely.
become a different woman working on my life project.
Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. Thank you for
Th-
your time.
yeah, thank you so much, Alexandra. Thanks for
Thank you,
having me.
Christine.
So many incredible takeaways from this episode, and here are some that I was thinking about. Tough times help us grow spiritually. Getting to know myself and growing takes time, effort, and intention. It doesn't happen on its own nor overnight. Growth is possible at any age. It's never too late to reinvent yourself. Finding oneself often means taking the less traveled path. Others might not encourage you to take the narrow road. They may not know what it is for you either. It is normal to be afraid of what people may think of you. Oftentimes, however, they accept you as you are once you step into your journey. Stepping into the right path may still come with challenges meant for growth. Live the life you're meant to experience, not for others' recognition. Happiness comes from honesty and living true to oneself, even when mistakes are made. Sickness or unrest may be a signal to slow down and listen, ensuring we're on the right path. Embracing redirection may bring discomfort, but ultimately leads to peace. Asking for guidance one small step at a time helps when stepping into the unknown. Slowing down is essential to staying on the right path. Walking the narrow path demands courage, grit, and resilience. The narrow path is the best, where the heart is. Hard times make us appreciate the present and live in the moment. Prioritize what matters most and make the best decisions for yourself now. Authenticity comes from making tiny decisions that are best for oneself despite societal expectations. Grit and resilience develop through consistent, bold actions into the unknown. Everyone can develop grit. Behind fear lies an opportunity for growth. Build a relationship with fear. Forget about confidence. Bravery is key. Be more present and enjoy what you have now. There is power in the now. The present is where God is. The personal goals help us grow, and the wisdom gained benefits everyone. Dear listeners, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you who has been a part of this beautiful journey with me. In the spirit of Valentine's Day, which is inching its way already, I'd like to offer you a unique and personal way to celebrate the essence of love through custom-crafted poems. This year, consider gifting a custom poem, a timeless expression of love. Let me craft words that encapsulate the essence of your relationships, creating a meaningful keepsake for your loved ones or yourself. Let me weave words that resonate with your journey, capturing the love that binds us all. In choosing a custom poem, you're not just buying words, you're investing in a reflection of your connection, a piece of art that will endure beyond the flowers and the chocolates. And as you and I know, we live in a world where we yearn for genuine and significant connections. My custom poems are priced at $299. If you're ready to capture the essence of your emotions in a personalized piece, connect with me right now to place your order. Drop a DM on Instagram or Facebook, or shoot me an email at alexandragrafalvarez@gmail.com. It's Alexandra Graf Alvarez, AlexandraGraffalvarez @gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Let's create something beautiful together. Ready to reshape your life through upgraded thoughts? Discover the transformative power within Self-Coaching Society, where your thoughts pave the way. Life presents challenges, but with intentional thought shifts, it can become your greatest ally. Join me on this empowering journey. As a special friend offer, enjoy a 70% discount, just $29 per month, with the coupon code SCS. Don't miss out. Explore more and claim your discount by using my exclusive link in the show notes. Let's elevate together. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'd love to hear from you, so please leave a review below or on Apple Podcast. If you found today's message encouraging, please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit. Your support helps us also reach more listeners. Thank you. Bye for now.